29-year-old woman here was set to wed the love of her life. Everything was working perfectly. Months of arranging my wedding with my fiancée, Sarah, 27, have gone under. The setting, the outfit, the food, everything was coming together. We were both really thrilled about it. My family was on board, and we even got a few of the really challenging relatives to RSVP. After all the chaos preceding it, I felt as though everything was at last coming together. But that was before my 55-year-old dad's talk with me. To put it mildly, we have always had a somewhat complex relationship. Growing up, he was always far away. He is not the emotional sort. He would say I could never live up to my older sister's memories, who died when I was 16. Things basically never truly returned to normal following her death. Without her, my dad didn't know how to be a parent, and I didn't know how to grab his attention without making him feel as though I was substituting for her. Though it's difficult to articulate, we seem to have never actually agreed on anything. Still, his response to my telling him about the wedding was strange. He seemed content, or at least he behaved as if so. Not the thrills you would have expected, though. It was more like he nodded, gave a weak smile, and carried on with his day. No, I'm so proud of you. Or, this is the happiest day of my life. Typical father's business, I suppose. He phoned me a few weeks before the wedding. He advised me to reserve a seat for someone special. He would be coming. I first assumed he was referring to some new girlfriend, but no. He dropped a bombshell. He had taken in a woman in her late 20s, my age. To be honest, I struggled to understand that. Not even knew he'd been considering adopting anyone. We weren't exactly tight, but if something like that had happened, I felt like I ought to have known. Though it seemed strange, I dismissed it. Possibly it was only a phase. Every few months, my dad would drop these haphazard activities he was usually performing. So I thought, okay, whatever. But things started to appear weird the closer we approached the wedding. My dad was basically radio silent. He was hardly in touch. No calls, no updates. This was my big day, and he failed even to check in? Though I felt that was a little off, I was too preoccupied with the turmoil of last-minute planning to be really concerned about it. And then arrived the wedding day. I thought about 1,000 things. My bridal party was hustling to get everything done. The caterer was phoning every 5 minutes, and the floral arrangements were running late. Your dad? Nowhere to be observed. Not one phone call or text message. The wedding was hours ahead, and I hadn't heard from him. I did not, however, want to start crying. I persuaded myself he would turn up. He had to, too. I was waiting in the rear, trying to collect my ideas when the ceremony was about to start, and I noticed him. Walking in with the woman he had adopted, my dad came to a still. My tummy sank. Still, what happened next really got to me. My dad headed directly for the front of the room, exactly where her previous seat was. Having always been in the forefront, my late sister, the one I never could live up to, had her place reserved for important events. Her seat was set aside for her by my dad for family gatherings. It had remained vacant ever since she died. But that day, he placed her down in the seat instead of merely walking to it. Like it was nothing, the new daughter. What I was seeing was beyond belief. My heart pounded. What was underdevelopment? Was I interpreting things? Trying to pull it together, I stepped over to my dad, but I could hardly talk. What is this? Why is she sitting there? I asked him. He answered straight-facedly, "This is my daughter now. She's going to take your place." In my life, I have never felt more blindsided, acting like I didn't matter anymore, like I was the one who didn't fit at my own wedding. My own father was fronting my whole family. Sarah fixed wide-eyed glances upon me. She was startled as well. Honestly, I believe it affected her more severely than it did me. She began dragging me aside and murmured that perhaps we should simply call off everything. There was intolerable conflict in the room. Silent, my family, who had been waiting impatiently for this day, was simply staring. Some were merely stuck in shock. Others were murmuring. their judgment, their uncertainty, and in that instant, I saw I wasn't the only one feeling deceived. Not only was my dad generating drama, he was creating a scene. I wasn't sure how to approach him as he was forcing me to decide between my family and my future. I wanted to go forward with the wedding. Months of planning have gone toward this, but given Dad's behavior, how could I? I had no idea what to do next as the day descended into turmoil. I felt I was losing my sanity the minute my dad arrived carrying his new baby. The day I had been preparing for months, my wedding day, was becoming a nightmare. All I could do was stand there paralyzed. I could hear the voices all around me. The worst element was I had to deal with my dad front of house for everyone. I marched up to him as I wasn't going to let this ruin things. As I got to him, the frustration, the uncertainty, all bubbled over. With a shaky voice, "What is this? Why did you bring her here?" I said. He hardly looked at me, as if he couldn't even be bothered to have a genuine discussion. "This is my new family now," he declared. "You have to come to terms with it." About that, I had no idea what to say. Was he truly serious? He had no trouble bringing this woman, my age, to cover for me at my own wedding. Now, he was behaving as if I should simply roll with it. I kept pressing him, trying to grasp. Why, today of all days? Why did this have to happen at the one event I had spent months preparing for? But Dad didn't give a damn. He said this new daughter was the solution since he had been searching for closure for years. She apparently covered the void left by my late sister, who had died years before. It made no logical sense. Closure by choosing a woman who resembled my sister so strongly. It felt more like he was attempting to somehow wipe the past, like I didn't matter anymore, replacing her. The new daughter, meanwhile, was behaving as though nothing was wrong. She continued calling me sweetie, behaving as though I was the one overreacting. She seemed to be all consolation. At one point, she even tried to wrap her arm around me and assured me everything would be well. It made me believe I was going insane. She was acting as the sympathetic, understanding stepdaughter as I stood there watching my father desert me. It was crazy. The suspense in the room was palpable, the awkward hush as my family worked through what was happening. My grandparents were upset on one side. On her part, my mother was equally perplexed and apprehensive about her response. On the most significant day of my life, my dad pulling anything like this right in front of me infuriated all of them. But my dad seemed absolutely unconcerned. "Why are you doing this today? Why did you have to show up with her at my wedding, in front of everyone?" I repeated. His answer was usual for him. "Just let it go," he said. "It's time for you to accept this. This is my new family." It was as if he could not even see the damage he was causing, or how terrible this was. Looking at Sarah, I hoped she might have some idea of what to do. Through all of this, she had been my rock. Even she was beginning to doubt everything. Whispering to me, she asked whether we ought to put off the wedding. Hearing her say that felt like a stomach punch, yet she was right. When my own father couldn't even regard me, how could we get married? I wanted nothing to end all I had labored for. I didn't want to let the deeds of my dad split the future I shared with Sarah. Still, it was becoming evident that fixing this might be too late. I thus did the only action I could consider. I chose to put off the wedding. As I made the announcement, my pulse was racing, and I could see our guests' disappointed eyes. They were all present, waiting for the ceremony to start, but given these conditions, I could not proceed as intended. I needed time to sort things out. Sarah needed time as well. Making a decision now that might haunt us later was the last thing I wanted. Not caring about the wedding, my dad could be heard in the background assuring everyone that family is what matters most. As I turned away, attempting to digest everything. What this meant for me didn't concern him. His only concern was this fresh dynamic he had produced, this new daughter he now gave top attention to. Needing to flee, I left the room. My feelings ran all over the range. I couldn't think straight or breathe. Feeling totally alone and abandoned, I finally started crying in the rear room. I seemed invisible to my own father, the one person who ought to have been there for me, helping me on the day of most significance in my life, had become a stranger. The nuptials, officially off. After all that happened, I could not continue to act as though everything was normal. It was obvious that my dad's behavior, hovering over my head like a dark cloud, would prevent me from getting married. It was everything that followed, not only the shock of him showing up with his new daughter at my wedding, the lies, the manipulation, the continual gaslighting. All too much to overlook was what it was. I wanted to call off the marriage. I had devoted so much time, money, and effort to schedule this day. But following that encounter with my dad, I found myself unable to move forward. My relationship with my father had broken totally. How could I wed someone knowing that my father mistreated me? How could I act as though everything was fine when it was so obviously not? My dad carried on behaving as if nothing was amiss even after the wedding was called off. He wouldn't own the damage he had done. He seemed to be living in another universe where nothing had altered. As if he hadn't simply turned my life upside down, he would phone and text me saying everything was okay. When I tried to approach him once more, he would simply ignore me, or behave as if I were acting dramatically. He would not accept that what he had done was wrong, that bringing this lady into our family and treating her as though she were my sister had done permanent harm. As if it wasn't enough, my interactions with my other relatives began to strain. Seeing how rude my dad's behavior was, some stood with me, but others started criticizing me. They advised me to have handled things differently and to have tried more to comprehend my dad's loss. I felt as though I was caught between two worlds, those that backed my dad's behavior and those that supported me. Ultimately, though, I wasn't ready to pardon my dad, as it was difficult to overlook the reality that he had done most of the damage. To aid in my processing of all that had happened, I made the decision to begin therapy. I had to find out why my dad had behaved the way he had and learn how to handle the aftermath. The treatment sessions somewhat helped, but the more I discussed my dad's actions, the more I came to see how consistently emotionally manipulative he had been. It was years of him pushing me aside, comparing me to my late sister, and never really being there for me, not just this one event. I was only now seeing it all fully, and it was difficult to swallow. Though Sarah was beginning to doubt everything, she felt deceived by my dad. And even more than that, she wasn't sure if she could keep our connection going. Given that I hadn't confronted my dad more aggressively, she felt as though she couldn't trust me anymore. She had good reason to challenge everything. I had been so consumed in trying to keep some sort of normalcy with my dad that I had forgotten the significance of Sarah's feelings. She was beginning to feel as though she didn't want to wed into a family so split and disrespectful. I ran, not knowing what to do. I wanted to make things work with her, but given my family now serves as this poisonous battlefield, how could I? Then my dad handed me a family legacy in an attempt to make it go away. I guess that was a gesture to indicate he was trying to right things. Still, it felt so hollow. A token or a piece of jewelry was not going to solve this. This has to do with respect, not with worldly objects. He had mistreated Sarah and me, and no present could make it right. To be really honest, I didn't even want the heirloom. I was offended. He seemed to be seeking my forgiveness, rather than owning up to what he had done. My entire family was siding as well. While some expressed their dismay in my dad, knowing why I was angry, others supported his behavior and advised me to be more sympathetic to his need for closure. Hearing the same thing over and over wears you. I simply needed someone to see things from my point of view, but it seemed as though nobody really knew what I was going through. There was then the guilt trip. Saying I wasn't being sympathetic to his loss, my dad started performing the victim. I was being selfish, he said, for not seeing things his way. It made me feel like the villain, that I was the one generating all the turmoil. But no matter how hard I tried to get him to see that this had nothing to do with his sadness, he simply couldn't grasp. He kept guilt-tripping me on how difficult it was for him to move on, and that I should be glad he had discovered someone who made him whole once again. Now I had no idea what to do. Although Sarah and I sought couples therapy, things were tight. Both of us were suffering from the strain of my dad's conflict with me and Sarah's demand to pick between her and my family. I wasn't sure I could ask her, and she wasn't sure she could carry on with the wedding. Every time I tried to decide, though, it felt as though my dad was still tugging the strings, so I felt as though I was the one who had to mend things. The part the new daughter played in all of this was only expanding. She kept showing up for family gatherings, behaving as though she belonged there, gradually occupying the area my late sister had used. My dad seemed to be deleting my sister's memories and substituting this woman. It seemed disturbing. Every day seemed like my place in the family was sliding further away. I had no idea how to stop it. I knew then I had to make a choice. Did I embrace my dad and his new family, flaws and all, or did I cut relations with him permanently? Living in flux and divided between my dad and Sarah was unacceptable. There has to be something giving. What? The aftermath after the wedding was far worse than I could have ever dreamed. The drama from that day permeated my whole family and seemed to be never going to cease when I called off the wedding. People began chatting and gossiping behind my back, and before long my family had split into two sides. Seeing how bad my dad's behaviors were, some helped me, but others sided with him in an attempt to defend his behavior, given his sadness. I was caught in the center of an endless storm that defined the whole scenario. The weeks passed, and everything began to fall apart even more. Reaching her breaking point, Sarah had stayed beside me through all the turmoil. Too much for her was the conflict between my family and myself, the continuous stress, and my incapacity to resolve things. She informed me she could no longer live in this strain. She could not handle the thought of getting married into a family that had treated her so badly. We split up. That was the toughest thing I have ever had to do. I adored her and still love her, but it changes everything when your own father substitutes someone else for you, when he treats you like you don't matter. That connection couldn't last. Though I believed this would be the happiest period of my life, it turned out to be the most agonizing. Dad seemed unable to understand the harm he had caused. We had another private talk during which he tried to defend his behavior. He insisted that he had been in years of mourning, and that this new daughter was standing in for my late sister. He even advised me to be glad for him, as he had at last found a path forward. What I was hearing stunned me. He seemed to be totally discounting the idea that this was hurting me. He never even thought about how his choices might be influencing my life, my relationships, or my future. I felt more alone the more he tried to shove this new daughter onto me. Now I had no idea where I fit. Was I merely an afterthought, or did I still count to him? It felt as though the girl he had adopted, not me, was the one who mattered now, replacing me. And even if I made every effort to keep the peace, I couldn't ignore that this was an unacceptable circumstance. This new daughter was also starting to participate increasingly in the household. She began coming up at holidays, attending family functions, and every time I saw her, I felt as though my place in the family was erasing. It was more than simply her presence. It was about the way she was being treated, like my sister, like she was the one who had always been a member of our family. Both enraged by my dad's behavior, my mother and stepmother contacted me. They couldn't comprehend how he could replace me like that, how he could bring this lady into our life and act as though she belonged. Although they both wanted to help me, they also wanted to avoid becoming caught in the crossfire of my dad's machinations. For them, too, it was difficult as they knew that defying him would expose the whole force of his wrath. My dad accepted therapy at last, following much back and forth, but it was quite evident he was not open to change while we traveled. Still mired in his loss, he was seeing everything through that prism. To him, I was meant to move on and accept the new family he had built. But he wouldn't see it no matter how hard I tried to explain that I couldn't simply ignore what had happened. Therapy did nothing except help. He seemed to be going through the motions, but he wasn't truly engaged in righting things. Friends and relatives had urged me to cut my dad out of my life. They couldn't know why I had let things go this far, or why I hadn't decided earlier to go. It was not that simple, though. You never treat cutting ties with your own father lightly, regardless of the toxicity of the relationship. I thus persisted in trying to save whatever I could, but maintaining everything together grew more difficult as the weeks passed. I then crossed my breaking point. I broke completely emotionally a few weeks later. I had vanished. Who I could trust anymore was unknown to me. My family split apart, and the one person I knew I could always rely on, my dad, was the one who had most offended me. I was alienated, betrayed, and totally alone. I began to emotionally and physically separate from my dad. I stopped answering his texts and his calls, though I know I had to. It was the toughest thing I had ever done. I could not keep acting as though everything was good when it was obviously not. I needed time and space to sort out who I was outside the turmoil he had brought about. Luckily, my mother intervened to assist in my processing of everything. Her actions broke her, and she urged me to concentrate on healing, rather than on trying to cure the unchangeable. She advised me that occasionally you just have to leave to keep yourself safe, and, despite my will to deny it, I knew she was correct. But my dad found the emotional space I was separating us objectionable. He became enraged with me, charging me with not appreciating his loss. Saying I was not allowing him to go on, he even called me selfish. He seemed to have no idea that it was about respect, limits, and my mental health, not about his grief. To exacerbate things, the younger daughter went one step farther. She messaged me, informing me I had to go past it and embrace her into the family. She even made hints about some fresh sibling dynamic we should embrace. That for me was the last straw, especially since I had no place in a family that was so fast to replace me. I couldn't keep acting as though everything was good. I decided about it. I had to totally cut off relations with my dad and his new daughter. Though it hurt, it seemed like the only way I could safeguard my own mental health and reconstruct my life. Though it wasn't an easy decision, it was the only logical one. I couldn't keep living in a household that didn't value me, and I couldn't keep acting as though everything would just work out. I was starting to run my own life for the first time in years, even if it meant divorcing the family I knew. I decided to cut contacts with my dad a few months ago, though deep down I know it was the correct choice. The anguish never goes away. Though I wish things had been different, I had to decide my mental health and peace of mind, above clinging to a relationship that was never really present for me. After some thought on all that transpired, one thing is abundantly evident. My dad's behavior was not unusual. Looking back, I can perceive his always emotional distance. I was always the second priority, even as a child. My late sister's memory followed me like a shadow. Until recently, though, I never realized how harmful that was. Though he was never really able to give it to me, it seems as though I was always striving for his affection and acceptance. His acts during the past few months just helped to put things in perspective. My friends and extended relatives truly stood up for me during the wedding disaster and the fallout. When things got disorganized, they have been a lifesaver. Cutting my dad out of my life was the proper thing I did, they informed me. Though it's difficult to articulate, having friends who really support and understand you makes all the difference. I felt as though I wasn't alone, for the first time in a long time. One major component of my recuperation has been therapy. Working through the trauma of my dad's betrayal, I have been striving to find direction forward. Among the most important things I'm learning is how to establish limits with people, especially those who don't value me. I let my dad walk all over me for years, allowing him to shape me into believing I was unworthy of love or respect. It's liberating to be learning to quit tolerating that behavior from everyone. Therapy has let me see that I need not prove anything to anyone. I am plenty exactly as I am. In months, my dad has not spoken with me, though I wonder whether he has tried to get in touch using other channels. I have decided to stick to my resolve to shut off interaction. He hasn't even apologized. Until he does, I cannot allow him to re-enter my life. It's still difficult to believe that my dad, the guy who ought to have been there for me the most, chose to drive me away. Still, I know I'm acting morally here. Right now, Sarah and I live far apart. Our relationship failed following all with my dad and the way the wedding went down. I realize today that it wasn't meant to be, even though I will always care for her. She battled my dad's actions on her own, and I cannot hold her responsible for not wanting to remain in a relationship entwined in such suffering. Though it makes things more difficult, I cannot hang on to what we had. It's fine, as both of us required different things. On the plus side, I resumed dating. Though it's been a slow process, I'm moving deliberately. I am wary, though. Until I've cleared my own emotional baggage, I desire no one else in my life. I now see that before I can really give someone else my all, I have to take care of myself. I want to make sure I'm in the correct mental and emotional state before diving into anything significant. This is a new chapter for me. My dad's new daughter sent me a note a couple of weeks ago, saying I should make up with Dad and embrace her as part of the family. She tried to guilt-trip me. I gave no reply. I can't keep allowing other people to try to push me into something I'm not ready for. I'm not going to pretend that everything is good just to make her feel better. She seems to be trying to fit herself into my life in an unwelcome manner. For the first time in years, I am beginning to feel serenity. I'm working on creating a life free from depending on the opinions of my family. I don't need my dad's permission to lead a content life. I'm not compelled to keep trying to mend a relationship that never was really healthy to start with. I'm forging my own road. While it's not always simple, it is mine. I received a letter from my dad a couple of weeks ago. Though it felt more like a last-ditch attempt to beg me to pardon him, it was essentially an apology. He urged me to give it some thought and to open up to him once more. Not yet opened the letter. One feels as though it is too little, too late. Though I might read it one day, for now I don't feel ready to confront it. My choice is final, hence I doubt anything will alter. Spending a lot of time with my mother, stepdad, and extended relatives has been only encouraging, and I now know I am not alone in this. I owe them a great deal. They have helped me heal. I know I have the affection and support of the individuals who really care about me. Hence, I no longer need my dad's permission. Still, the weight of the past hangs about, always hoping one day he would come around. I spent so many years trying to win my dad's love. Among the toughest things I have ever done is let go of that hope. Still, I'm on my way. This experience has taught me a lot, mostly the need for good limits, self-respect, and the bravery to leave abusive situations. Looking ahead, I'm concentrating on designing the life I want. Though I might never have the father I have dreamed of, I am learning to establish my own family among the people who really love me, and that's sufficient for me. I know I'm stronger than I ever imagined possible, and I've come to love and value myself. This is a fresh start. I'm ready for whatever happens next.